Welcome to Reconstruction. This is really kind of a downer topic to finish the class with, but it does explain a lot of what is going on in the world today. So there we go. Let's talk about Reconstruction. I want you to read the passage in the textbook, in your packet, and then to tell me what you would do. So the Civil War ends, and for the most of the class, we've talked about slavery. Well, Civil War ends, slavery's done, and we got some questions we got to figure out. Number one, what should we do with the devastated South? We burned it down. Their governments are gone. What do we do? How do we bring them back economically? How do we bring them back politically? And the thing you got to think about is North and South have to come back together. All right? And it comes back to the question, how does the United States become whole again? Now, some things we have to think about when we're talking about all this. Yes, the South maybe started the war, but let's talk about personal relationships. You have that boyfriend or girlfriend and you guys have that huge argument. What do you do when you get at the end of the argument? Do you apologize and work better? Or do you go, boom, I won that fight, sucks to be you? I'm going to tell you, I'm not an expert at marriage, but after 9 years, that's not a wise thing to do. My Anna's just looking at me and smiling big because she knows that's just stupid. What do? We can't punish the South. Do we punish our family members or our boyfriend or girlfriend if they're wrong? That's not the type of relationship we have here. We can't do that. And the last thing is, what should we do with the newly freed slaves? I've mentioned the slaves are uneducated. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm not saying they're dumb. Because let me tell you, my favorite is Harriet Tubman. If I was ever in a bar fight, I'd want that little woman on my side because she could kick butt and take names. She knew how to escape from the South to the North. She knew she was a smart lady, but she wasn't educated. We have a whole group of slaves that are uneducated. W.E.B. Du Bois is a gentleman that you're going to learn about later in history, and he writes in his book Souls of Black Folks that he travels the South and he walks into a sharecropper, which we're going to talk about what that is here in a few minutes, house. For a family of 4 or 5, they have one plate, one spoon, one knife, one glass, and one chair and one table. But over in the corner, they have a huge piano. That's that education that should be coming in. Unfortunately, we have over 1 million people that don't have the education of how to deal with money manners, how to, all this stuff that they never had that opportunity to learn. All of a sudden now it's here. How do we get them there? And that's a question we have to answer. So one of the first things that gets set up is the Freedmen's Bureau. And its goals are to help slaves deal with set up labor agreements between the whites that own plantations still and the newly freed slaves. And we're going to call them freedmen, okay? That's the best term for them, because guess what? They're freed men and women. So we do that. They set up ways to reconnect family. And we've talked about how slaves, their family members would have been sold and stuff like that. The whole goal was to bring them back together. And finally, set up schools to educate the freedmen and teach them how to read, write, do math, things like that. Quite honestly, this is one of the best things that comes out of Reconstruction. And it gets shut down pretty quickly because, well, pressure. There's 3 plans of Reconstruction. Lincoln, in his 1864 inaugural address, says that we should welcome everyone in with malice towards none. His idea was 10%. And what that meant was 10% of the voters pledged their allegiance and the state could be admitted. The congressional plan by the radical Republicans wanted to abolish slavery, wanted to have majorities swear allegiance, and kind of really wanted to punish the South. And it was led by a group called the Radical Republicans. And the Radical Republicans was a really was a few Republicans in the Senate who were really wanting to punish the South. Johnson's plan was pretty similar to Lincoln's amnesty, 10%, and he wanted them to ratify the 13th Amendment, which the 13th Amendment is outlawing slavery. Johnson gets a lot done before Congress comes back in, and Congress is like, no, you don't get to make decisions, we get to make decisions. And I want you to meet this guy here. His name is Thaddeus Stevens. I quote and call him the ugliest man ever born. I mean, the man got hit with the ugliest stick. I mean, you can tell. Anyway, he pushes for the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment makes the freedmen slaves. Freedmen's not slaves, makes them citizens. Okay? And we also see the equal protection of their rights. Radical Republicans take control of the Senate, which we've talked about. And we see some Reconstruction Acts. We see the Military Reconstruction Act, which puts the South into 5 military districts where the military takes control. We see the Command of the Military Act, and it basically limits President Johnson. The thing about President Johnson, before we go any further, Abraham Lincoln is president. He gets elected in 1864 with Vice President Johnson. Andrew Johnson's a Southerner. And he never left the Union. He always stayed in Congress to represent Tennessee. But he's a Southerner. They don't trust him. So that's why they limit the military powers that he has. And they also passed the Tenure of Office Act, which makes it illegal for him to fire any cabinet member. It was well known that he and the cabinet was not agreeing. So they were basically setting him up for a trap. So Johnson fires Secretary of War Stanton. He breaks the Tenure of Office Act. So what happens is he gets put on trial. They charge him, put him on trial in the House. And the final verdict, there's one vote that keeps him from being kicked out as president. And for the rest of the term, he basically goes out quietly till 1868. Radical Reconstruction in the South. So Congress takes over. They set up, the voting is given to all men. And public schools are established and segregated, which this could be also another success of Reconstruction, because schools in the South were horrible for both whites and none for blacks before the Civil War. Now, both of them have schools. It was an improvement. Segregation between them, that's going to be handled later on. Land ownership did not change. If you owned land before and did not sell it, you owned it still. We had carpetbaggers. These were Northerners who came to the South to help reconstruct the South. Many of these Northerners took advantage of the Southerners and kind of ripped them off. Scalawags. These were Southerners who helped the North with Reconstruction. They were considered traitors. And there is a lot of political corruption going on in Grant's administration and radical Reconstruction. In the government works, there was political corruption. The freedmen elect their own officials. There's 2 former slaves that serve as senators, 14 serve in the House. Sharecropping. Sharecropping is an economic system that took advantage of the freedmen. What would happen is, instead of being slaves, they'd go back to a plantation owner and they'd sign a contract. And in this contract, they had to buy all their supplies from the plantation owner at the plantation owner's cost, whatever they feel like to charge them. And the plantation owner would kind of keep track of their debt. And then, as they're growing the crops and they sell the crops and they bring them in, the amount of money they earned did not meet the debt. So they worked another year. It was another way to keep these freed families tied to the land. Success of the Republican Party, freedmen followed the Republican Party, and the whites supported the Democrats down in the South. There was some resistance. We have the Ku Klux Klan. It was organized in 1865. It intimidated freedmen. And when Grant becomes president, he does crush this the KKK at this point. He sends in military. They're done. They do come back later and later and later, yes. Black coats. These are local and state laws meant to keep the freedmen in the minority. Like, freedmen could not carry guns. Wait, Second Amendment. Well, how do we right that wrong? Well, we sue them. Well, freedmen did not have that knowledge yet. Okay? Jim Crow starts. Jim Crow was the segregation that Rosa Parks fights in 1950s with the bus boycott. But there are laws up until the 60s that segregate, and they get squashed. There is government corruption. Republicans made more money, spent more money, and had higher taxes. Grant's cabinet, his own cabinet, there was Black Friday, and this was a crash coming from Grant's brother-in-law trying to corner the gold market. The New York custom ring, this bribery of officials. They would pay officials not to pay taxes coming in. And we see the emergence of political machines. Democrat Tweed is in New York, and they control government officials through bribes and support. So, how does Reconstruction end? Election of 1876. It's a close election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. And what happens is, it's so close, and you can see on the picture I sent you. The compromise comes late at night. Louisiana would give the 8 votes for Hayes to win if Reconstruction ends. And if you notice, Deep South, this should be a Democrat right here. It's Republican, and that's why. Hayes gets elected, Reconstruction ends. What I want you to do is take a look at this picture. It's labeled the Freedmen's Bureau. And I want you to tell me what the artist thinks of the Freedmen's Bureau based on that. You all have a good day.